So, I work summers as a camp counselor in the northern part of Ontario, Canada. On the day this particular incident occurred, I was camping with a group of 10-year-old boys on the same lake that the summer camp was based on. So like a routine camping trip, we canoe out to the site and we set up our tents. Me and my co-counselor Mike take turns supervising the kids while they swim, build the forts and play games, etc. We cook some food over the fire, sit around and tell stories, cook s'mores, the typical Canadian camping experience. Around 9:30ish, I tell the kids it's time for bed and they head into their tents, which were positioned in a small walk away from the shoreline, but still in the line of sight where we had the fire pit. So at this point, the kids have gone to bed, and me and Mike are just shooting the shit, talking by the water, smoking a cigarette. Just basically hanging out before we decide to head into our tents and call it a night. What happened next still troubles me to this day, and remains my go-to scary campfire story. We were both gazing into the pitch black night water, when we saw a small light approaching us slowly and slightly above water level. We speculated what it could be for a couple of minutes, before it came close enough for us to actually see that it was mounted on the front of a kayak, and that someone was approaching our campsite. Now it's important to note that as a camp counselor, part of our training goes over how to deal with a stranger encounter. I was prepared to give a mystery paddler the typical speech about how we were camping with the group from a recognized organization, and we would respectfully ask that they find another campsite. However, this person's appearance shook me to the bones as the light drew nearer. Paddling in this kayak was a woman who looked to be in her 60s. She had incredibly long wisps of gray hair that were trailing into the water. Her skin looked like old leather, and her dead-looking eyes were tough to spot under all her wrinkles. She looked directly at me, and when she spoke, she pointed in the direction of the tents. Not really knowing how to respond, and quite frankly, crapping myself, I respond by telling her that they're fine, and she has to leave. "That's good, just as expected for this time," she said with a smile, then turned her kayak and paddled off into the night. At this point in time, myself and Mike were legitimately very creeped out, not only because of the appearance of this mystery woman who resembled a corpse, but also her inquiry about the whereabouts and safety of the kids we had brought on this trip. Not knowing what else to do, we grabbed our hunting knives and sat by the fire, checking on the kids. Half an hour later is where things started to get really creepy. Across the lake, a female counselor was leading another trip for kids the same age group. She sent me a text which read something along the lines of, "Hey Sean, stop screwing with us. This isn't funny anymore. My kids are really creeped out." I instantly called her and let her know that I had just seen someone near my campsite that seemed eerie, and I was definitely not trying to play a joke. Apparently, one of their kids had opened their tent door to take a leak, and had seen the woman with long hair standing with her arms open towards them near the shoreline. So, a few years back, I was cruising around with my brother, cousin, and a few friends. We decided to get out and walk the trail, even though it was pitch black outside. We decided to go down this creepy back road. We got to the end of it, and there was a trail that continued off of it. We decided to get out and walk the trail, even though it was pitch black out. We didn't really have a good feeling about this place, but we pressed on anyways for fun. Now, let me say that if anyone else had come down the road, we would have definitely seen their headlights in the woods. So, after walking for a little bit, we all went back to the cars. My friend, Alex, stopped and said, "What's that noise?" We all stopped talking and heard a hissing noise. His tires on his car had been slashed. We all panicked because nobody else would be at this dead-end back road in the middle of nowhere this late at night. So, we got in the cars and took off. Not too far down the road, Alex's car was undrivable, and we had to squeeze him into our Jeep. We went to a gas station to get some snacks, and when we came out, the Jeep's tires were slashed too. I don't know how that could have happened. So it seems like apparently someone had followed us and slashed our tires too. I was 8 years old when we first moved into the house on the edge of the forest. Our first sign that something wasn't right was that our dogs were absolutely terrified of the forest. They never went into the forest for any reason. If a toy they'd been playing with found its way past the tree line, they would refuse to retrieve it. And when one of us went in, they would pace anxiously until we returned. On occasion, we noticed the dogs staring at a spot in the forest in obvious distress, sometimes growling or barking, but we could never see anything there. My brother once carried one of the dogs into the trees to show that there was nothing to be scared of, but she wriggled out of his grip and sprinted into the house in a panic. If we were in the backyard when it was getting dark, we sometimes heard noises like someone was walking through the forest, sticks crunching underfoot, branches being pushed around. If we called out, there was no response. But if we shined a flashlight around, we would occasionally catch a glimpse for just a split second of something that we could swear looked like a person walking around in the dark. My parents quickly banned us from entering the forest at all after dark, and even during the day, we weren't allowed to go out of sight of the house. My sister's bedroom window looked out at the backyard and the forest beyond, and she remembers looking out of her window one night and seeing a shadowy figure standing right at the edge of the backyard. She says there was something off about it, like it wasn't quite standing on the ground, and it was a little too tall to be a person, and it was sort of distorted, and she was convinced it was staring at her. She called for our dad, saying that there was a man in the yard staring through her window, and when he ran outside to chase off whoever it was, she continued to watch the figure. It didn't move away, but when the light from our dad's flashlight passed over it, it suddenly just wasn't there anymore. We also started to regularly hear knocking at the back door at night, with no one there. Our parents thought it was teenagers playing pranks, and stopped bothering even opening the door, until one rainy night when the knocking was persistent and agitated. My mom pointed out that there might be someone needing shelter from the heavy rain outside, but when she opened the door, not only was no one there, but there were no wet footprints on the porch. The knocking continued the whole time we lived there. It would happen several times in the span of a few weeks, then stop for months, and then start up again. My parents eventually installed a security camera, and there was never anyone at the door. The camera wasn't all useless though. About 3 years into living at the house, my brother started having night terrors and sleepwalking. When he went sleepwalking, he would always go out to the back door and start walking towards the forest. My mom, being a light sleeper, would often hear the door open, and would run out to get him before he made it to the forest. After the third or fourth time of this happening, my brother wanted to see the camera footage because he wanted to see how he looked when he was sleepwalking, I guess thinking it'd look funny. The footage showed him walking out onto the porch, then pausing as if listening for something, and shaking his head, then reluctantly walking forward as if being pulled or forcefully guided by something. One evening, my dad was in the backyard, and he heard my sister calling him from the forest, seemingly in distress, thinking she'd gone exploring into the forest and fallen over and got hurt. He ran in and started calling her, but quickly realized it was too dark to see her, and he couldn't pinpoint where the voice was coming from. He told her to wait where she was while he grabbed a flashlight. When he ran back into the house for the flashlight, he saw my sister inside, safe and completely unconcerned. At the time, my dad hadn't told us about hearing my sister's voice in the forest. So when I heard my mom's voice coming from the forest months later, while I was outside with the dogs one evening, I didn't question it despite the fact that I'd seen my mom inside recently and I didn't notice her walk past me. My mom was calling for me, saying she'd gotten her sweater caught in some branches and needed me to come in and help her. As I walked in, the dogs started barking, alerting my dad, who saw me through the window wandering into the forest. He came outside and called to me, and I said I was just helping Mom. He yelled back that Mom was inside and I needed to run back to the house as fast as I could, which I did. After this, my parents had built a fence around the backyard and started looking for a new place. In the time between the fence being built and us moving out, it got way worse. We'd hear knocking at the door much more regularly, as well as tapping on the windows, as if someone was walking the perimeter of the house and trying every window. We would often hear scratching and scraping sounds on the fence, and voices beyond it. My brother's night terrors got more frequent, and one night, my mom didn't hear the door open when he went sleepwalking, and he woke up standing at the fence, staring into the forest, with the dogs barking at him. The last morning we spent there, less than 4 years after we moved in, we woke up and found the back door fully open, and the security camera footage showed it slowly swing open on its own. Since moving out, my brother's sleepwalking has stopped, though he still does get night terrors and he suffers from pretty severe anxiety. Recently, a few nights ago, he called me out of the blue, and after a bit of small talk, he asked if I think the door being open that final night means whatever was out there finally got in. He was trying to make light of it, saying he was getting into the spirit of Halloween, joking about how we should all get exorcised, just in case something latched onto us all of those years ago. But I think he's deeply bothered by everything that happened. I have no idea what was out there at night behind our house all those years ago.